Welcome to this video in which we'll talk about coefficient of variation, which is a very useful statistic, and it enables us to compare the relative dispersion of any variables around their own mean. And it does something by using both standard deviation and mean together. It lets us do something that we can't do just with standard deviation on its own in terms of understanding variables' relative dispersion. So starting off with some import statements here, we'll just take a look at CV and what it's all about. So standard deviations are useful. They're very important, and they help us understand for any particular variable how much we can expect it to move around its own mean. So some variable that's very consistent, that tends to stick very close to its mean, is going to show a low standard deviation, and something that's more volatile, something that's tougher to predict, that's just moving all around the place, is going to have a bigger standard deviation. But the challenge with standard deviations and different variables is that they're hard to compare, because a variable that's measured in larger units, or that just is on a bigger scale, is just going to have a bigger standard deviation, all else equal. And so when you look at the standard deviation of one variable versus another, it's hard to really be able to draw any conclusions about relative dispersion or predictability of those variables. In comes CV. So with CV, we just take the standard deviation and we divide by the mean, and that gives us an ability to understand the relative dispersion for a given variable. And in comes Lobster 23, which contains data for each day of park operations across the 2023 season, as shown right here. And we can see that we've got statistics for each day for many different variables that are shown. Here we're just looking at the first 5 rows. But suppose we want to dig in a little deeper to understand Gold Zone revenue and online merch revenue. Well, we can start by looking at a mean. A mean is a great way to start to understand any variable. And we can see that the mean value for Gold Zone revenue is much greater than the mean value for online merch revenue during the season of park operations. We can then look at standard deviations, and what we'll see here is that Gold Zone revenue standard deviation is greater than the standard deviation of online merch revenue. But it's hard to really conclude much from that, because Gold Zone revenue is the values for it just tend to be much bigger, and we can see that just by looking at the data set, but then especially calculating the means and seeing that we just expect Gold Zone revenue to just be a bigger number anyway. So coefficient of variation is going to let us be able to compare the relative dispersion of each of those two variables around their means. And we'll start off by using the variation function from SciPy Stats, which was imported up at the top. And right there, we see that the CV for Gold Zone revenue is 0.248, and the CV for online merch revenue is 0.459. So from that, we can actually say that the relative dispersion of online merch revenue is actually greater than that of the Gold Zone revenue. And if we look down here at where that comes from, if suppose we just want to be a little more old school and see, okay, where did that value really come from? Sure enough, it is standard deviation divided by mean. And we can do it this way too, just to see that and prove that these numbers match with the ones shown up here. And folks, that is a look at coefficient of variation. So thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed the video, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks very much on behalf of Team Lobsterland.